Hi, Erin here. I'm here to talk to you today about relationships and how I believe they are the cornerstone of trauma-informed instruction and teaching in general and trauma-informed approaches. And also, I want to provide a little bit of justification, so why they're so important for students. So I want to give you some tips for building relationships with these students. So trauma affected students have a difficult time with trust. Put yourself in their shoes. Who knows what happened to them, but at some point in their life, it was likely an adult or somebody older than them, somebody they may have even looked up to, who broke their trust in a really, really big way. And this could happen, so let's say a student is abused by a cousin who's maybe just like 2 years older than them. That's not that big of a deal in terms of trust with adults, you'd think, but it is because these students they've had a sense that they weren't protected. And maybe they even might have told a parent or an uncle or aunt, and that person might not have believed them, or maybe they did something about it, but they didn't do enough about it. So you can start to build an understanding of how students who've experienced trauma have a hard time trusting adults. So that's one example where they experience trauma. It's not by their parent, it's not done by their uncle or aunt, by that adult, but because that person wasn't there for them or didn't protect them, whether they advocated for themselves or not, there's a sense that they can't trust that adult who was supposed to protect them. And then the obvious one is when they are actually offended, physically abused, sexually abused, verbally abused. They're treated poorly, very poorly by an adult. So especially you can think of if parents are abusing their children, this is a great example of a reason for children or students to be apprehensive about trusting adults. And then think about their school experience. A lot of students who've experienced trauma have had pretty rough school experiences because the impacts of trauma make it really difficult for them to manage themselves in the classroom. And over the years, their teachers have probably had a pretty hard time with behavior management with these students. And so they've come to see themselves as troublemakers. They've come to see themselves as less than capable. Whether academics are hard for them or not, they know that the adults see them differently if they've had the behavior manifestations that come along with trauma experiences. So those are kind of the whys. Students who've had a hard time trusting adults because of experiences they've had of abuse, and also maybe a hard time trusting teachers because teachers have had a hard time with these students, and so they haven't had good experiences with the teachers. So what can teachers then do when they have these students in their classrooms who have experienced trauma and who therefore are hard to build relationships with? They sort of push people away. So what can you do? Well, there's one thing that we used to do, well, I'm sure they still do it, but at the residential treatment center where I worked, one thing we would do is interact with students outside of the classroom. And that's much easier for me to say, working in a residential treatment center where we had a much different structure than the typical public school. But there are ways to do this. So I'll just tell you what we did, and then maybe in the comment section you can explain ways that you've been able to spend time with students outside of the formal classroom. And so ways that I've done this is we eat lunch family style. And so I'll sit down at the lunch table with my students next to me, one on either side or one across. We're at this really long table, just one table for like 20 people, and sitting side by side and doing anything, and this is kind of where I'm going with this. So you're spending time outside of school with these students and you're sitting side by side. This side by side interaction removes the pressure of making eye contact, and it makes it a lot easier to open up for these students. So sitting at the lunch table is one way. We would work in the garden, so we'd be shoveling side by side, or we wouldn't be side by side, maybe we'd be face to face, but we're looking down. So the openness is much richer when you're not making eye contact. And then I'd do PE with them. So we'd be walking on a trail maybe, and so I'd be in front and they'd be in back, or they'd be in front and I'd be behind, and we weren't making eye contact. So it was a lot less pressure. For some reason, I mean, you can put yourself once again in their shoes and imagine how it's different for you to talk to somebody when you're walking one in front of the other than it is when you're sitting across a table, or if you're in a classroom, and it's just not as natural, and there's a lot of stuff to get done. So anything you can do where you're not in the teacher role and the student's not in the student role per se, is going to increase the chances that you're going to talk about stuff that are things that are meaningful to students, like what they're doing over the weekend, or what they like to do for fun, that kind of thing, what they're passionate about. But I would encourage you to really listen well when this is happening. So and also have authentic questions to ask, and really, really, really be interested in what they have to say. That's going to change everything. So to recap, a reason why students might have a hard time with relationships is because they have a hard time trusting adults. And one way to build a relationship is to get outside the classroom. And in the public school, this might be coaching, this might be doing an extracurricular activity, it might be going on a field trip, it might be starting a class garden, it might be doing art projects, anything where you can remove yourself as a teacher and be more of somebody who's curious about the kid genuinely. And doing so side by side, or one in front of the other, or something where you're both looking down, it's going to make it a lot easier for the student to open up. And I would say, I don't want to leave you with that. I guess there are a million other ways that you can build a relationship that doesn't need to happen outside of the classroom, which I know is pretty hard for some people to accomplish. Just within the classroom, finding time. It's all about time, honestly. So you've got to prioritize that, whatever that means in your classroom or in your school. But finding time to get to know the student, and not just ask them how their day was, or ask them what they're eating, what they had for dinner, but figure out what they're interested in, and remember what they say about what they're interested in, or remember what they say about anything, and then bring that back up. So you need to prove to them that you're listening to what they're saying, whether it's a comment they're adding in the class, or like I said, if it's something they're talking about that they're really passionate about. Remember what they say, bring it up again, ask questions about it, and really show them that you're listening and that you want to get to know them on a different level, other than just teacher-student. So, yeah, I mean, you can imagine how it would feel for a student to have somebody even just notice them when they feel invisible. So the more effort you can put into really recognizing that they're there in any way is going to make a difference. So I would say before you can do a ton with trauma-informed approaches, you're going to need to build that relationship, and those are a couple of ways to build the relationship and a couple of reasons why you need to do that. So comment below, follow Subscribe to the channel, and I know I only have a couple videos up now, but I'm starting to get rolling, and I really want to help you improve your interactions with and the outcomes for students who've experienced trauma.